Excellent. Thank you, team. So we are moving on to item number 8.3 of the report found on page 70. And it's the NPS on urban development capacity. And I'm going to hand it over to Hamish and his team to walk us through that report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to take the opportunity to welcome Aston Mitchell in front of meet everyone here today. Aston joined us at the start of the year, along the same time that Lisa joined us in the research and policy team. And as you can see today, she's quite key in delivering a number of the papers that we're discussing today and a number of other work areas. So no doubt you'll get to see and hear a lot more from Aston going forward. But this is the first time she's come to talk to the NPS UDC report that she's helped to prepare.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, councillors and community board members. This report provides a snapshot of the last quarter's activity, the fourth quarter, and focuses mostly on building consents and resource consents. The consent activity has decreased during this quarter, which is not unexpected given that COVID-19 did begin during this period. House sales and values, as well as nominal mean rent data, has recently been updated at the end of March. All have shown long-term increases, however there has been a slight drop in the most recent reporting. The next NPS UDC report that I will bring to Council will contain the next quarter's activity, as well as annual reporting for the past year, with more in-depth analysis of the year overall. I will now take the report as read and am happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thanks, Aston. And I'm just looking at Councillor Mccann to see whether he wants to add anything with his housing hat on, and if not, I'll open up for questions.
Sure. I think one of the things that the report highlights is that COVID-19 has changed the entire outlook, and I'm wondering, what is your crystal ball looking like? I mean, we are hearing a lot of people saying that we will not have as much immigration, so that's going to lower some of the pressure on housing, but we're having a whole lot of people coming into New Zealand and hopefully not jumping any fences yet, who are returning to our country. How do you see the report, which is a whole lot of information missing because we're in lockdown, and the next report will also, and I mean not information missing, but there was no activity. How do you see the long-term trends? And I realise that is a ridiculously hard question to answer. So as your first question around the table, that is probably as bad as it gets.
That is really crystal ball gazing. I think, I'm not sure whether Angela's able to expand a little bit on the actual current levels of activity, because I mean this is post-dated information. While we did see a slight dip in some of the activity around that period, my understanding is there's still reasonable levels occurring at the moment. I could only speculate as to what that looks and feels like, and I know Natasha's, we're just having a chat about this before, so she might be able to add a bit more about what that current activity looks like. I'm also aware that we've received, or there's been some work undertaken around the population projections around COVID assumptions across the regional council. I don't have the results here, but I mean that'll also be something that we'll be quite keen to look at and kind of reflect into that annual update and provide a bit of that outlook there. But I can't really speculate too much into the future at this stage, because a lot of the data in that we have is even lagged quite a bit. So I suspect we'll be waiting to see what that looks like over the next 6 months plus, with that longer tail and implications, I think, potentially that have been flagged this morning, sitting around business and what business looks like and how it operates in the Kapiti district. I'm not sure if Natasha's able to add any flavour about what you see or feel going on the ground through building consent and resource consent activity at the moment.
Angel, talk to that.
Yeah, that's right. In terms of where building consents in particular are at, it has actually rallied quite a lot in the last sort of few weeks. I mean, we're looking at sort of week-to-week statistics, so it's certainly not a long-term, you wouldn't want to put any money on a long-term trend, but it's certainly more on par with what we've seen over the same period last year. It's slightly behind in some instances, slightly ahead in some in terms of inspections. It's kind of hard to say where that's going, but particularly. So it has come back to more or less normal post-COVID, but it's hard to know how long that will maintain for, given the way that projects go through the pipeline, I guess.
I'm going to hand it to the acting CE, and I've got something to add, and then I'm going to look to Councillor Buswell, see if she has anything from the business sector in terms of housing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I was just going to add so from an on-the-ground point of view, from talking to a couple of consultants recently, Cuttress, Landlink, that they certainly have got a fair bit of work and more work coming than they had expected, so they're very busy at the moment. Also talking to a developer last week that has 22 sections already pre-sold in terms of a development that they're working through at the moment. I think there's about 36 or 37 sections on there. So there seems to be a fair bit of activity, and it seems to be ramping up a little bit as well in terms of the here and now. What 3 or 4 years might look like, I don't know, but...
Yeah, and that's the same feedback that I was going to add. Certainly the ones that I know that I've spoken to, builders or developers, not so much the consultancy side of things, is they have a lot of work coming up. So there's no sign yet of that dropping off, but that's obviously more referring to new builds and some alterations, but generally new builds. Do you want to add anything to that?
Can basically confirm what you're saying as well. I've spoken to a few builders and things, and some of their projects actually dropped off during COVID because people were scared about the outcome, but then they've all of a sudden picked up again, so people are feeling a little bit secure out there as well. But I think too that, over the last month, something like 47,000 people have returned to New Zealand. So even though it's not immigration as we know it, it's the immigration of our New Zealanders coming back. So, they still probably need houses if they're going to make it a long-term stay. So, yeah.
Next on the list, I've got Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. Thanks. I have 3 questions. 2 of them are for you guys, and 1 is probably for finance. Firstly, is it possible to have 2 copies of the report in paper, please? 2 hard copies. And secondly, I guess I'll just go straight to my finance question, and that is, this is a report that is Council has to produce quarterly at the request of the current government, and I just wanted to ask our finance department how much the government is contributing to the production of this report. I think it's really valuable, but I also think it's just yet another example of workloads that are put on councils that, we have to go to the ratepayers and say, please fund the putting together of this marvellous piece of work. And just thirdly, a quick observation. The feedback I've had back from builders is that they are just so busy right now, and that all it's done is taken 3 months' work time out of the year, and all projects will still go ahead.
Thanks, Councillor Elliott. Mark De Haast is currently remote. I've got Natasha putting her hand up over there.
Very happy. It's a big tick, 0. Yeah, that's right. I feel like you probably do it like this. Government doesn't contribute to this work being undertaken at all.
So that's no funding from central government, typical to the earthquake-prone buildings and all the other aspects that you've thrown at us. I take your point, and the fact that we're expected to respond and resource things like this. That being said, it is helping inform our housing portfolio, amongst other things. Who have I got next? Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Just building on Councillor Mccann's point about crystal ball gazing in terms of that sort of year in review report. I think one thing that would be also interesting would be to look at the impacts of transmission gullies delays as well, because there's rumours kicking around obviously that might be pushed out to 2023, and obviously that key piece of infrastructure has been one of the driving forces of people coming out here. So the longer that's delayed, potentially that's going to have some sort of impact, or make our ability to adjust to population growth from that, give us a bit more headway into that. So that'd be quite interesting to understand as well.
There's a double whammy with that too, and that's all the workers engaged with that contract, and any of those out living locally, likewise with PP2O.
Well, and it's workers that they've lost who have had to go back overseas and then can't come back in. So there's a whole lot of quite, complex people movements associated with that from lockdown, which would be sort of useful to understand in terms of the housing market locally.
Thank you. Councillor Mccann.
This may again be outside your remit, but through you, Mr. Chair, have we noticed any changes in the funding of building developments, etc., or is the stream of investment still there?
It's probably a question for the consenting team. I guess the question is the spend and the consents at the same level or dropping?
I guess where the investment comes from is largely a commercial issue for the developers. It's not something that we really get any kind of handle on that from our perspective.
I think Sean's wanting to just add to that.
So from a subdivision point of view, so the work that those consultants have coming through their books, I guess, shows some level of continued investment. So these aren't building consenters, these are actual new subdivisions coming through and then being asked to actually do work on those. So there is some money coming through from somewhere. So again, in the short term, but whether that's where it's from or the level of that, whether it's small scale or large scale, don't really know at the moment.
Thank you. We move on from there. Thank you. Councillor Halliday.
Nothing too earth-shattering from my end. I was just curious. We do these reports from June. They start in June and not July, which is July's our financial year. I'm just curious if there's any reason for that, or does it just not really impact on anything from a financial perspective in that regard?
I know it's quite curious and quite challenging sometimes as we put it through the processes because there is a little bit of confusion. But essentially, the period that we report against with the quarters has been based around the initial first report that was presented, and also based around some of the data and the lags that come out from HUD, Housing Urban Development Ministry, that publishes some of the data. So it's kind of a historical factor, but it's something we'd quite like to tidy up going forward. But that said, given some of the lags of the data and how it comes through, there's never going to be a perfect date as well. So even if we lined up with business financial years, we'd still have some of those challenges and issues, I think. But it is something we would like to kind of redress going forward if we get the opportunity to kind of recalibrate the modelling and reporting process at a point in time.
And through you, Mr. Chair, also just in relation to how these reports are set out, I was wondering if it's possible to, in future, and it may or may not be possible, to have you've got subtotals down on the bottom on these figures. I was wondering if it's possible to have them going down the side as well in regards to figures. It's easier to compare years, if you like, by sort of having a summary, if you like. So new shops, say for argument's sake, on table 1, actually it's not a good example, say the new house batch at the top line, say for argument's sake, having the a long column subtotal on the end of that, if that's possible. Just something to take on board. It may or may not be.
Thank you. I don't see any further councillor questions, and so I'm looking to our housing portfolio holder who's checking Facebook. Councillor Mccann, who is happy to move recommendations. I'm just checking you wasn't looking at Facebook. And seconded by Councillor Elliott. Is there any further discussion? All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. Carried. And thank you, team, and nice to meet you, Aston.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor Mccann. It was just because it was your portfolio. I thought you might want to... And so we move to the next item on the agenda, which I'm scrolling down, which is 8.4, found on page 83, and just welcoming Darren and Jamie to the table, who are going to introduce this report around the major events funding. And Ange, as a portfolio holder, if you want to add a bit at the end, just giving you a heads up as well. So over to you, team, when you're ready. Just give you a heads up, we have had a bit of a discussion this morning already about events and so forth, and so you can segue nicely into giving us an overview.
Good morning, and thank you for the chance to come and speak to the paper. As you can all imagine, the COVID-19's been a pretty unsettling period
for events, and there's been a lot of uncertainty in terms of what can happen and what can't happen. As a result of the lockdown process, there was a lot of unknowns in terms of that future events, in terms of what could happen and when it could happen. As a result, we put the fund process on hold, so we understood what could happen in this current year. We are basically in a situation now where there is a lot of demand for events and there is a lot of strong interest. However, there is difficulties, I suppose, for some events in terms of where sponsorship and those sorts of things is coming from. So I suppose what we're keen to do is confirm the timeframe for the event fund process and provide that certainty to the events in the area. And also, after the discussion that happened at the last meeting about the events fund, is make the fund available for the future year as well. So allowing event organisers to better plan with more certainty in terms of available funding, and so something that councillors were very keen to see, and I think the need for that is now more important than ever before. In terms of, we are seeing a lot of strong interest, in terms of events. So Sarah Ferguson's doing the light train event. We understand that event is sold out already, and so there's a lot of strong interest, a lot of strong demand, and I think it's how we can make sure that we support those events to happen and provide certainty and provide that opportunity. We also understand that 60% of the people attending that event are from outside the area, which is great in terms of how that's bringing. So how can we encourage more of that activity? Do you want to talk about sort of the numbers in terms of events?
So in terms of what events mean for our region, we did a little bit of analysis, and in the 2018-19 year, there were an estimated 58,000 attendees at the events that we supported, of which 45.8% of them were visitors to the region. And it was estimated that those visitors brought in about $1.1 million to the region. In the year just been, Māori Land event unfortunately was cancelled, so the numbers are significantly lower than the previous year. But of the 45,000 estimated attendees that the other four events brought in, 58% of those were visitors to the region. So it's looking like all of those events are quite keen to run again in this year, and have indicated that they would like to apply for funding, those that haven't already been committed for the year.
Excellent.
Happy to take questions.
Thank you. I'm just going to hand it over to Councillor Buswell.
I would just like to express my thanks to the ED team. I know that over the whole COVID lockdown period, many people were enjoying that extra bit of time, but these guys were working tirelessly through that whole period, and I know that it was tricky at times for you guys. So yeah, thank you for all the work that you've done. This is great, and this is really illustrating how flexible this team has become in terms of being able to reallocate money and just to move things slightly to I guess to pivot in these times, which is really heartening. And we spoke earlier about the destination strategy, and we've just heard how important this particular area is for encouraging people to come to Kapiti from outside of the region, and that's what we want. And all of these events have really showcased what Kapiti has to offer, and I'm so pleased that we now have a really well-established offering in terms of Māori Lands, the Kite Festival and the Food Festival have all, the Food Fair, have all been really well established in Kapiti to grow, and each year they just grow bigger and bigger. And I'm also pleased to see that Māori Lands is doing another little festival of sorts later on in September. So again, they've had to adapt to the situation. So yeah, I'd just really like to thank you guys for all your work.
Thank you, Councillor Buswell, and I want to add to that, because being involved with the team through COVID, saw exactly that, a real strong commitment to serving this community and working on economic outcomes. You only see part of the team here, but I know that they were all working really, really hard and long hours and putting in a tremendous amount of work, and a lot of the stuff that you don't see behind the scenes, and that's resulted in the activity like the council Facebook page and the destination page and some of the other stuff is rolled out as a result of Darren and his team. So I just want to thank you guys as well. It's been fantastic. It's been great working with you guys as well. So with that, Councillor Mccann, I have you up next.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to also thank you for the work you've done and for the good explanation about how these events actually can help pump money into our economy and help us to, have a post-COVID-19 response. I just have a couple of questions, if that's all right. Are you comfortable that people and event holders and promoters will have the time to be able to put the proposals together in the very limited time frame? And I do acknowledge that we have actually spoken prior to the meeting.
So we don't get a huge number of applications each year, and we have been in conversation with applicants, potential applicants, all year. So they are all waiting, and I get emails or phone calls from at least 1 or 2 a week saying, when will this open, really want to apply. The majority of them are planning already, and a couple of them have already announced that they're going to be holding their events. So this is just what they tend to do is they tend to plan the bare bones part of their program and their event, and then any funding they're able to secure through this program allows them to actually deliver an even better event. So yes, I'm confident that they can put it together.
Thank you, and that's excellent to make sure that we've had that communication ongoing rather than just waiting for a decision here. So I really like to thank you for continuing to do that. In terms of our media, when we were emailing, I was just identifying that there are obviously different target markets. Are we going to, one of them is obviously internal, in terms of our ratepayers and making sure that they're aware of this good news, but also another one is perhaps event promoters, etc. around New Zealand. Will we use the fact that we've got this event funding in our response as an opportunity to promote Kapiti to the wider New Zealand?
We haven't planned around promoting the fund itself to wider New Zealand because we want it to be specifically for Kapiti events, and that we don't tend to have people coming from outside of the region to put on an event in the area. It tends to be historically local people who put them on. Yeah. But in terms of promoting Kapiti as a region with the events, absolutely we will be shouting that from the rooftops.
Yeah. I suppose we were looking at the criteria in terms of is there enough potential activity going to come through the process, and whether we needed to, reduce the size, of the types of events and those sorts of things. But there's been, I suppose, enough conversation with the existing sort of parties to say that there should be a good portfolio of opportunities that come through to ensure that we don't end up in a situation where a lot of people put a lot of work in and we can't satisfy the demand as well. Because we quite often end up in a situation where we get applications totaling sort of 300,000 or 400,000, and we only have 100 and something to offer, and we don't want to create a situation where there's a lot of expectation that we just can't deliver on as well, sort of thing. So
that makes perfect sense. And finally, while this is probably the antithesis of what you've just said, should the applications not come up to scratch, what is the process from there?
So the part of the process is working with a panel and making sure that we have recommendations and that those recommendations are well supported and backed up. If there isn't sufficient, I suppose if we won't allocate just for the sake of allocating. If there is only recommendations for allocation of 150,000, that's what we would recommend in discussion with the panel to council, and have further discussion with council about what next happens with that and how that works, I suppose, with the next steps or recovery process as well. We definitely see that events are an important part of the recovery, They're really important in terms of getting that community to engage and supporting the economic side and the cultural side and those sorts of things. So it's just what are the best options, but we would come back to council on that.
Thank you. Excellent.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of point 17 and 18 on page 85, I guess my question is, if council events are going to start applying to the Major Events Fund, this would be funding in addition to existing council funding for these events? And would we be looking to increase the overall pool of the Major Events Fund to ensure that sort of private events still have access to that overall fund? Because I'm aware that it gets fairly well fully allocated most years, and then if council events are coming in and competing for that same funding, then there's potentially going to be less funding available for other events to be run.
It's an interesting one. I suppose what we've heard from some of the council teams is that definitely sponsorship is more difficult in the current environment, and I suppose there's a little bit of uncertainty in terms of some of our existing events that rely on external sponsorship, whether they're able to get it. I suppose there's a concern that some of those events, like Movies in the Park or whatever, if they don't get that sponsorship, could they happen or not, sort of thing. I think, this fund has always been very much focused on the private events and making sure that we're leveraging that investment. And I think that we would still have that prioritisation. I suppose there's the concern, though, if some of those council events don't happen, what does that mean? And I think that would need to be a discussion with the recovery plan as well, and understanding how that would work in terms of the recovery funding, to say, is there availability within the recovery fund to cover this and these sorts of things, or is there a need to partner with the major events? So we need to work in tandem with that and not do an isolated decision.
Yeah, because I guess a lot of those private events are going to have the same issues around sponsorship drying up in them. So they'll have, I guess there'll be increased pressure from them to access that pool of funds that we're looking to go into as well. So I guess, as you say, the recovery funds is potentially an avenue where we could look to I guess, ease some of that pressure would be really useful. I guess the other question I had is, what are some of the previous examples of the town centre activations that might be considered as events under, if council was to apply for funding from this?
So that would be something that we will be working with the team that's been involved in the town centre projects, and I think working with the community on that. I think it's a matter of having those discussions and see what could happen. But there's been different things, like when the Waikanai project was finished, in terms of events within those areas to encourage people into those town centre spaces, and making sure that that's supporting the retail and hospitality activity. In terms of exactly what that looks like, we haven't had those discussions at this stage.
Thank you.
And answering your question, though, there's some previous events that Darren's talking about were smaller events, like I think when the mural was revealed over here by Coastlands, that had zeal involved and some food and bits and pieces. So they're sort of mini events that to support the activation of the area. And that's, there's that, and Mahara Place as well was the other one, where there was a number of events rolled through there through the construction phase. Next up's Councillor, did you want to add to that, sorry?
No, just exactly as the Chair mentioned, Waikanai, we organised, I think there was an essay competition, then we had a band and a prize giving, small scale things that could be organised quite quickly and happen, say, on consecutive weekends, things like that, just to keep some activity moving through those spaces.
Thanks, Sean. Councillor Elliott, I had you up next and then you've gone off the screen, so we're just... Thank you.
Okay, I just had a question. It's a really unique year, and some of the major fund applicants may have been in receipt of large pools of government funding as part of COVID response. How does that figure into the percentage of funding they're considered to receive? In relation to the whole pool of funding we have available and the previous levels of funding that they've had. And considering too that some of these big events too are encouraged to work towards self-sustainability, after a few years.
I suppose it's a really interesting one, because government is putting a lot of money out there at the moment to support the industry because of all that uncertainty and and the lack of potential sponsorship opportunities. Murraylands is a classic example where they've just received funding from the Major Events Fund. So they received $100,000 as part of a process to grow these events even further. And I think, definitely that funding, as we understand it, is about saying how can we continue to make these events even bigger than they are now and support that to happen. In terms of the current investment, what's been proposed as part of the renewal for those ones, it's less than we've done previously. So it's less than was done last year. And so it's sort of, a process where they could potentially apply again for increased funding, but we'll be having conversations with them to understand their situation and what's going on to make sure we understand the full dynamic.
And interesting with that one, I know from talking with Libby, they've even been asked, and I'm not too sure what entity, but to go up to Auckland and produce something similar up there within their community. I think they'd been asked to shift to Auckland, and they said no, Otaki is our home. However, we're prepared to bring Otaki to Auckland.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good.
I think I had a couple of other names on the screen which have dropped off, and I think it was Councillor Holborough and then Councillor Halliday from memory. I think we've got Martin up next, so I'm sure you don't mind waiting, Councillor Holborough.
I don't mind. Okay. I just that's a few questions. Page 6, 7 and 8. Sorry, number 6, 7, 8, page 83. The process was put on hold during COVID, so report not forthcoming. I just wanted to build on in regards to you've been talking to people in regards to wanting to have events in Kapiti. So there are things sort of in the pipeline. And are there things are they geared more to the 2020-21 year or the 21-22 year?
So the organisers I've been speaking to are mostly looking at this coming summer, so the 2021 year. But that's also because we haven't had conversations with them about the following year at this stage. So we've obviously got Māoriland Film Festival, Otaki Kite Festival and the Food Fair. They've got their dates sorted. The X-Terra event, they have got a date already for February, and they brought in a huge number of external people. They had hardly any Kapiti people in the event. It's, at this stage, the conversations have been about the coming year, this year that we're in now.
Cool. I just wanted to refer to the web page in regards to the event funding, because it says here that just applications will reopen for the major events funds in 2020. Have we? There could have been perhaps a bit of a lead-in, because this application or this fund opens tomorrow. Is that right? And just runs till mid-August, I think it is. And I was just surprised that there wasn't a bit more information about that on the events fund page, giving people the opportunity to lead in. If people might have been keeping an eye on this page with regards to things as well, or is that perhaps coming after the discussion today about the additional funds?
So the work, all of the background work around the website was in progress in March when COVID came on board, and everything around that was put on hold while the comms team were busy dealing with their stuff, and we were dealing with our ED activity. There is a draft web page set up that I'm going to go and see them about this afternoon that has all the information. But yes, you're right, there could be a better lead up, and one of the conversations we've been having with the comms team is about what information we can land on there between application dates, so that there is better information for people, particularly around what might be required of them if they're going to apply.
I suppose what we have been trying to do is make sure we have those conversations informally with the majority of existing event organisers, so that they are aware of that process and what's happening in the current situation.
Look, maybe a little bit more onus or emphasis on the fact that you're happy to talk with people might be an important aspect of this, because it just really comes in as a sort of if you have any questions about your event, please contact us, rather than encouraging people to come and perhaps have a chat. Got that. Who's on the committee? The assessment panel. I'm just...
So at this stage we have
Councillor Mccann, Darren, Tiana Rakiti from Wellington, New Zealand. We have Kahu, and we did have Rob McIntyre from Destination, but he's unavailable on the day for the panel. So we've requested Tiana put together some other proposed industry experts from the private sector events area in Wellington to take that spot.
Thank you. Funding allocations for 3 years. The 3 projects that we've currently got on there, at what stage are they at? Is this like the event dates they've got coming up? I know that they've been receiving funding. Is this their last instalment or?
This is their second year of the 3.
Second year.
Yep.
So the funding that we give for the the funding that's available, 125,000, that's what will be available fundamentally next financial year as well. Is that correct?
I think they get slightly less next year.
No, it's the same. It's the same next year.
Yeah.
And obviously depends if we allocate money
Depends how
in
many
this cycle
goes,
for
yeah.
next year. We would adjust them.
Another question, do we have a small event fund as such? I mean, we're talking about small events on the Kapiti Coast, but do we have, like, I appreciate...
Councillor Halliday, I think we've had this discussion previously.
Okay.
I'm happy if you feel differently, but I'm pretty sure we've had a discussion this training around the benefits of a small fund and a larger one.
Oh, I wasn't asking the benefits, I was just wondering if there is another pool of money for small.
Look, I didn't mean to cut you off, so I don't feel like I have. Darren, do you want to just respond to that?
In terms of this fund is concentrated on the major events, and there's no separate economic development funding for smaller events.
Okay, cool.
I think the response previously was that there are, the community boards to approach for some assistance around smaller events as well. Councillor Elliott, is it just relating to this?
Yes, I can just give a supplementary answer. Yes, there is the that is smaller.
Councillor Halliday, did you have anything further? All right, and we're moving on to Councillor Holbrook, and then I'm going to move to the recommendations.
Thank you, and thanks for all the work that's gone into this, and of course reiterating the thanks for the work that went in through the lockdown. So I really appreciate the fact that you've put in this provision for future events, and I'm aware that it's not taken up much this year, but that's potentially due to the uncertainty around COVID, and also due to the fact that it would be new events that would need that lead-in time, and we've predominantly been talking to existing events. So just based on that, so next year, will the same process be followed, whereby people can apply for the following year after that, or are we just tying up the loose ends from this year next year, because that's all I'm seeing in the report?
I suppose what we need to do is have those discussions with the event organisers and with council, and see how this goes in terms of this round. I think that, through previous discussions with the committee, there's strong support for continuing to do this process, and I suppose it comes down to whether we do it for just the 1 year or we do another cycle of 3 years and that sort of funding. So we'd be keen to have that discussion again with council. But at this stage, it just recommends for the current year, and we would need to come back to council about that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it is entirely appropriate that we're having those discussions with our existing events, because they are very high quality and successful events, and good to keep them going. So thank you.
Councillor Elliott, I was going to move on, but I see you've done.
Rob pushed my button.
I will move on.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can I just ask one thing?
Councillor Halliday, go for it.
With regards to just some guidance here, actually, with regards to recommendations, if you've got some suggestions with regards to changing the recommendations at all, is that to be made now, or is that to be made at another point?
So I appreciate you asking. I had signals from Councillor Buswell that she was prepared to move the recommendations. What your options would be to ask to move the recommendations yourself, and you could propose a change to a recommendation or an addition, or if someone like Councillor Buswell had moved the recommendations, you could propose an amendment, which is a different process. So no one's currently moved the recommendations. If you were wanting to, and you've got the wording for any changes, you can put that to the table and see if you have a seconder. Or if you
Well, the first thing is...
Do you want to maybe just canvass what you're thinking? Because I want to help you here. I'm not trying to...
Sure. It's not so much changing, that it's just maybe moving a couple of things around. I just want the clarity, first thing. 1, 2, 3, number 29, fourth line. And it would be funded from the 2022 budget. I'm assuming it's meant to read 2021?
Correct.
Yep. So just a slight amendment there. I was just wondering whether the last paragraph in that sentence, which reads, any funds not allocated as part of the funding round in 2020-21 would be made available via a separate funding round in 2021. I think maybe that was more appropriate on the end of recommendation number 28. Just puts clarity around that. The only other
hang on a sec there, so we can deal with them one at a time. Is there any merit in moving there?
Well, I just thought it was getting caught. The funds not allocated as part of the funding round 2021. That's a specific thing in regards to 2021, which was dealt with in the first paragraph, whereas the second paragraph, number 29, is dealing with 2021 and 22. So you could modify perhaps any funds not allocated as part of the funding around 2021-22 could be made available or a separate funding around 2020, but do the same for the year 2021-22.
I think it's semantics. I think it achieves the same outcome, but
Darren,
do you want to add?
So that does relate to the funding for that 21-22 year. So it's probably just not reading. So it's when applications, the residual funding that isn't allocated for 21-22 in this year. So if we allocated 50,000, there was 75,000 remaining. We would do a separate funding round. And that's in that 2021.
That second year. And I'm assuming we'd be doing the same thing for the 2021 ending financial year as well. So if it's not all allocated, it'll be coming up for reallocation.
I think that's as we talked before about coming back to council and saying what's the appropriate action in terms of any allocated funds.
We'll discuss that at that time.
Yeah.
So I think the recommendations are best, well, just because it's the written report, is probably left as is. I forgot what your first one was around. Correct. Yeah.
So we can make that change before the motion is put.
It's as amended. Yeah. Yeah.
Clarity around point 30. The Strategy and Operation Committee approved council events applying for funding in 2022 major event. Now, subject to existing criteria and showing benefits of the event to the COVID-19 process and impacts from COVID-19 that are required. I was just wondering, I didn't quite follow that last part of that. Subject to existing criteria and showing benefits to event a COVID-19 process, impacts on COVID-19 that required the application to be made. That doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, I'll just ask the team to explain that, and then if you're happy with got a better understanding of the recommendation, we can move to someone moving them.
Yeah, I suppose it comes down to this is not the normal situation, and that the only reason we've put this forward is because of the COVID-19 impacts, and that if council was to consider, funding council events, it should show benefit in terms of recovery, and it should show that there's a reason through a COVID impact, such as sponsorship difficulties, that they've had to apply for this process.
So essentially it's enabling it to open it up a little bit wider, and that they can justify the impacts from COVID.
And I suppose it's putting a bit more of a stringent process around council events, saying that there's a real reason why they need to apply.
And the existing criteria as well is that they would need to fill out the same form as any other event organiser and go to the panel and then present to council.
I'm sort of not too sure which comes first here. It's a bit of chicken and the egg sort of scenario. When we were having a discussion about this, I was going to bring up perhaps having, if there are excess funds left over, then being made available to the wider community as a potential option as well. How does that conversation fit into this?
Could I clarify, if there are extra funds left over, it's not made available to the wider community, they're just made available. Have I got that right? It's just the fund. You can apply to it, well, not so much as elected lemon, but anyone can apply to it. You've got to meet the criteria, put in a quality application, and you'll receive the funding if it meets the criteria. And what they're saying is if there isn't enough applications, or some of them aren't successful because they don't meet the criteria, and this has happened before, we've had funding left over, rather than saying use it or lose it, the team are saying it's still available, bring some more applications in, we'll consider them.
Would those applications be in relation to, they wouldn't be in relation to large events though, would they? So the criteria could be somewhat restrictive, rather than being a little bit more relaxed to use up those funds to perhaps support community activity.
I think, before we would come back to council about that, we wouldn't, we would want to have that discussion with this committee to make sure that, any changes were, agreed upon and were clearly understand in terms of the outcomes produced.
So would it be fair to say that if the funds aren't allocated through the event fund and through council making applications as well, that you'd be coming back in, say, relatively short order, say ballpark maybe September, but that's, and saying that these funds are left over, what potentially, do you hear some suggestions or recommendations of what we could potentially do with those?
Yep, I can't confirm timeframes, but we would come back in terms of, yep.
Yeah, I think it's, just to be clear, I appreciate your intention is not to be difficult, but we probably want to avoid getting into timeframes not knowing what the future holds. But equally, I think what I'll make the comment, just reading the conversation, that the team don't want to get tied into a whole lot of little applications for, $1,000, $1,500 events, and getting 10 of those will just tie up time and resources. They can come to the community board or whatever. So there is a line there that the ED team will walk, where what justifies an event and the time and resources. So with that team and time's marching on it, hopefully I've given you enough time there, Councillor Halliday. We've got recommendations 28 to 29, 29 as amended, with the date 2021/22. Councillor Buswell is happy to move those. Councillor Mccann is happy to second them. Right of introduction.
I would just like to say that this is an amazing fund and our community benefits so much from it. Just bringing people into the Kapiti Coast and showing what we've got to offer is hugely important, and even more important nowadays. So I'm really thankful for the changes that have been made today, and the flexibility that our staff have shown within the restrictions and the timeframes as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Ange. And look, there's also been several members that have expressed their thanks to the ED team, and I wonder, as mover of the recommendations, whether you could ask that that's noted in the report. So I don't know if you've got some words that you want to put to that, and then I think I had you up next in terms of, no?
It's really hard to believe that a decade ago this fund was stopped due to lack of interest, and then we restarted it again 7 years ago, and congratulations on your work. I'm so proud of what we're achieving in this district. Thanks.
I can't see any more. Oh, Councillor Mccann.
I will just say well done to the team. I think a community is not just bricks and mortar events. Really help to feed the soul and make sure that the community is buzzing. So well done on being so malleable and adjusting, and fantastic work to you and the team.
And I must say, I have seen photos of Councillor Mccann on Facebook centre stage, so you may see an application coming from him at some stage. I'm not sure. He throw his head in the ring. Councillor Buswell, there's no further hands up. Did you want to add a comment towards the end, just thanking that staff?
Yeah, I was just going to write something down. Yes, I'd just like to note a thanks to the ED team, and that events play a major part in our tourist offer, and it's great to profile what our community can offer.
Thank you. So I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, and that is carried. Okay, and we move on to item number 9, public speaking time. And Trevor did want to have something to say. So, Trevor, if you want to just pop up there.
The period of COVID period was, especially in the stage 4 lockdown, was particularly hard on older people, and especially the numbers who live by themselves. And so I just wanted to say thank you on the record to the council staff, and to the mayor, and those Sophie and Martin, who particularly helped our older people out during the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Trevor, and I appreciate you taking the time to convey that to the team and to the individual councillors. And Grayson, if the report could just note that from Trevor, both to elected members and to the organisation as well, that would be appreciated. Thanks very much, Trevor. That's a great way to finish the meeting. We have no minutes in item number 10, and so with that, I'm going to call the meeting closed. Thanks, team. Yeah, look, we'll just a couple of minutes. We're just going to switch off live streaming, and if everyone's available.